about this. Martin, do you think the British Museum has lost its sense of purpose or is just run in an amateur way, that amateurism that has affected the UK over many decades?
Well, clearly what's happened and what's over a period of years that we now are aware of is pretty shocking. And it shows a lack of security protocols to quite an alarming degree. As I was saying on another news item, a few years ago, I needed to see a silver penny from Bath, not a million miles from your stamping ground of Edward the Elder. I wanted to study that Bath, rare Anglo-Saxon penny, and I went through, quite rightly so, a whole range of security protocols. I take my ID and so on and so forth, and I had to show them, and then I was able to discuss this coin with the person that was there. But of course, I was an outsider, and what this goes to show is it's much harder to have that same level of security when it comes to insiders. But you have raised a really interesting point about what are we to make of the huge number of items, of artifacts that are in the back store catalogues. Now, on one hand, of course, every major museum does need a significant amount of back store catalogue. Now, listeners and viewers may be thinking, why? Why do you need all this stuff? Well, partly because you are a repository of the national story, but secondly, because you don't know what people will make of it in the future. I mean, even now, scientific techniques are being applied to fairly mundane items in museum collections and answering questions that bones and fairly boring pottery was thought had given up all their stories in the past. We can now ask more about them. So we do need to have a fairly large back store amount, but you make the point, how big is too big? And I think that it really is a case for major museums like the British Museum thinking, we have got an awful lot of stuff around the country. There are amazing museums, in Norwich, in Taunton, in Wales, in Glastonbury, in Scotland, in the Midlands, etc., etc. Why don't we lend more of it? And we're prepared to also put it into schools boxes as well. Let's use some of our stuff as loans boxes, and let's regard that stuff as being, in a sense, expendable for the greater good.
Because that's so important. You mentioned how much security you had to go through to borrow it or to examine the Edgar penny, but there's no security if you work there. Isn't it sensible, if you've got 8 million items, to take a risk with some of the lower value ones so that people can really feel and understand the history rather than just having them locked up and only viewable or stealable by the collectors?
I absolutely agree. One of the most exciting things in the British Museum is that every now and then, if you're going around the British Museum, you'll suddenly come across somebody at a table with a whole bunch of stuff in front of them, and it's genuine articles. It'll be pieces of Roman pottery, an intaglio, a medieval ring, and you can touch it, you can feel it, you can talk about it with them. And the idea is we've got quite a lot of this, we respect it and we care for it, but we're prepared to put some of it at risk of damage for the greater good of education. And I think there must be a significant amount of stuff in the back store catalogues that could be put into an expanded schools programme, for example.
Brilliant. Martin, thank you so much for joining me. I've now got my panel today of GBNews senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Moylan. Nigel, do you think the British Museum has lost its sense of purpose and needs to get that back because it's got 8 million items, it just doesn't know what it's got? It doesn't seem much to care.
The one thing that's come out of this is appalling. They don't know what is actually down there in the vaults. I wouldn't agree with you about selling them. I think it's important to preserve this stuff, even in other museums around the country. I'm not against that, on the basis that researchers often want to actually go through them, and it can add a piece of the jigsaw to our history because they discover something there. What I'd like to see the British Museum do is be the British Museum. I think that the items in there that we took or arrived from other countries should go back to their country of origin, which is where they should be exhibited.
Daniel, should we hand everything back to the countries of origin?
I think the question on that is always going to be who has the correct legal title to something. If it was bought, if it was acquired properly, then it belongs to the people who acquired it and it belongs to the museum. If something was stolen and you can show it was stolen, and of course theft shouldn't be rewarded and it should be returned. That is the approach we should take. But any idea that everything that came from another country should go back, however it was acquired, is just, if I may say so, Nigel, political correctness gone mad. And I'm slightly disturbed with this idea that the British Museum can have too much and that it shouldn't be an Aladdin's cave, because actually part of the purpose of the British Museum, I think, is to be that vast store, that Rees-Mogg's treasure, that sort of endless, limitless treasure house of stuff acquired over the centuries, acquired properly, I hope, but acquired over the centuries. It should be catalogued. We've seen a shocking mismanagement.
But that's the point. If they don't even know what they've got,
it doesn't matter.
Do they deserve to have it?
I think that's completely wrong. They deserve to have it if it was properly acquired. But if they don't know what they've got, I couldn't agree with you more in this sense, that it should be a job when they get their management straight, and when they get their trustees doing their job properly, one of the jobs should be cataloguing what they have in the back store so they know what they actually own on behalf of the nation.
What the trustees and previous chairman have been doing over decades. Surely the absolute routine of a museum is to have a catalogue of what it's got. And the idea that the British Library or the Bodleian wouldn't know what it had is absurd. They obviously have to know, and you'd have expected exactly the same from the British Museum.
Yeah, well, you know, from the British Library, if you go in there, you can ask for the most obscure book, and it will be delivered to you in a matter of minutes. So they do know what's there. And yes, I agree with you. It's absolutely astonishing. They didn't know what was there, and as a result of that, researchers won't be able to find the bits that they're looking for. And there are bits of our history that are missing. There are new theories coming out. History goes very quickly.
And therefore, it's failing to serve its purpose.
Sorry, sir?
It's failing to serve its purpose if the researchers can't go there.
Yes, I mean, I think the British Museum is a wonderful place for a walk on a Sunday afternoon, but I don't think that should be its primary purpose.
That's a brilliant note to finish this discussion on, and thank you to my panel. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, it's 5 minutes to midnight, or actually nearly 4 hours to midnight, until the ULEZ expansion will reach the outskirts of London.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. David, a very generous comment from David. Welcome back, the inimitable Jacob Rees-Mogg. Your intellect, wit and impeccable manners have been missed. Well, it's extremely kind, though I must confess I enjoyed watching Patrick whilst I was away. And Elizabeth says, I can well believe the British Museum is stuffed with uncatalogued treasures. Back in the last century, I used to catalogue and classify things for the Bristol Museum, ancient Egyptian jewellery, 17th century engravings, that sort of thing, as a volunteer. I can well imagine if I hadn't done it, it would still not be done. And just think how much more the British Museum has got. So, at midnight tonight, the long-awaited and much disputed expansion of Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emission zone will take effect as public pressure has mounted over the past few weeks for the mayor to put the brakes on the policy. But like the deaf adder charm we ever so nicely, he will continue to stoppeth up his ears. The leaders of His Majesty's opposition has even taken the decision to scrap the party's commitment to introduce low-emission zones in cities across the country. The instinct to point out that there's another flip-flop is tempting, but I'll refrain from it because actually he's right for once. But with Sir Keir seemingly taking more sensible steps, the Mayor of London seems to be left on a melting iceberg. The Telegraph has revealed a flurry of damning evidence about the ULEZ process. The Mayor's deputy, Shirley Rodriguez, asked Imperial College London to reword research because it said, despite these improvements in air quality, there was no evidence of reduction in the proportion of children with small lungs or asthma symptoms over this period. The whole debacle demonstrated signs of what London Conservatives called an alarmingly closey relationship between the Mayor's office and the scientists it was funding. But that's not all for the Mayor's PR department. It emerged just over the weekend, new plans for a pay-per-mile road tax. The Mayor denied the plans, despite the proposals clearly being in the list of suggestions for his transport strategy. So, will the iceberg continue to melt around the Mayor of London, or is this, in fact, the government's fault? Legislation on which ULEZ is based was passed by the Conservatives, and Parliament could obviously repeal it, which I happen to think we should do. Perhaps my panel, Lord Moylan and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, will have some answers. Daniel, you worked for Boris Johnson as Mayor of London. Boris is famously environmental in his approach. Don't you think if he was still Mayor, he'd probably be doing the same?
Well, I don't know. I just say, first of all, the legislation on which the Mayor is acting, Schedule 23 of the Greater London Authority Act, was passed by the Labour government in 1999, and those are the powers that he's been using. And although it's been claimed that the government has the power to stop ULEZ going ahead, I'm not a lawyer, but having some familiarity, I don't believe they have that power without passing new legislation. You might say they should have passed that new legislation before it came in, but it's coming in tomorrow. Would Boris Johnson have done this? Boris introduced the ULEZ in the centre of London and laid plans for expanding it, and to the North and South Circular, but not beyond. And the remarkable, it was Khan implemented that, but Boris started the plans. Now, the remarkable thing was there was very, very little resistance to it, because Boris did it properly. Boris actually listened to people, and Boris didn't have an ideological approach, and his plans were carefully consulted on. What's been happening here is that, I think primarily to raise money, Khan has been imposing it on parts of London that feel they don't need it, on people who are much more dependent on the car, and he hasn't listened to the blowback that they have delivered to him or moderate it in any sensible way in order to accommodate them, except for a little bit more money for scrappage.
But isn't the real change actually the cost of living crisis? That when the earlier ULEZ came in, people were feeling quite prosperous and they were happy to go along with all these environmental things because it was great virtue signalling.
Yes.
But now, when people are worried about how they're paying their bills, their mortgages are going up, these charges hit home so much more. And that's what's changed the political dynamic rather than consultations.
I think there's a great deal of what you say there, but I still think Boris did it well and Khan has done it very badly and hasn't listened. And he must be aware of the cost of living crisis himself and should have realised that would have an effect on how people saw it.
Nigel, the leadership of the Labour Party has realised that this is politically very difficult. The Uxbridge by-election showed that voters won't vote to be penalised. Why is Sadiq Khan being so obstinate?
Well, I think that he was on the way to going there long before the Uxbridge by-election and felt he couldn't change tack, even if he wanted to, and I'm not convinced he does. I think that the principle of ULEZ is absolutely right. I'm disappointed that the Labour Party have turned against it because they've been spooked by Uxbridge. The problem that I think Sadiq Khan faced was that it could have been introduced in a better way. You may, once it was extended around Greater London, the answer would be a graduated charge. So say you start at £2.50 and then keep increasing it. And the other thing is is he never seemed to put enough thought into dealing with the counties surrounding London. So what happens to a nurse who lives, say, in Kent or Essex, but works in a London hospital? But she should have got, or he should have got, the scrappage scheme as well. Would qualify for that scrappage scheme.
But it doesn't make any difference. The Jacobs report, which was, I think, commissioned by the Mayor, shows that the reduction in particulate matter will be 0.1%. The reduction in nitrogen dioxide, 1.4%. And it notes a disproportionate financial impact on people with low incomes, the disabled, and young families.
Yeah.
It has almost no effect, and it penalises the least well-off in society. Can that possibly be something a Labour Mayor is doing? Surely he's meant to be on the side of the least well-off.
I mean, this was actually something that Boris started. It seems to be quite successful in central London in the sense that air pollution is down by half. That back in 2017, when it was introduced, that you had 39% of cars were compliant. Now 94% are.
But is that to do with ULEZ or to do with the fact that engine regulations were changed and that the government EU and German car manufacturer drive to have diesel cars reversed, and that therefore people for 10 years have been buying cars that are cleaner with nothing to do with ULEZ?
No, but in which case then you're solving your air pollution problem, however you look at it. And so it is a question of the introduction. Either you believe in improving air standard or you don't. But I think that what we've run into is the public turning around and saying climate change is now the fourth major issue with voters after cost of living, NHS, immigration. When they're confronted with an inconvenience caused by it or have to pay for it, they're not so keen.
They don't like it, but that's
politicians
crucial.
are running scared.
But that's absolutely crucial, that people don't want to pay for environmental schemes that actually don't make any difference, that it's essentially a con, that what's improved London's air quality is that a policy that was advocated by a government and pushed very strongly has been completely reversed, and petrol engines don't put out the particulates and the nitrous oxides that diesel engines do. And that reversal has had much more effect than a penal ULEZ.
Well, I think that's right. I have no doubt whatsoever, having been Deputy Chairman of Transport for London, that this is primarily driven by revenue raising, and that what the Mayor needs is money for Transport for London, and this will raise it. Of course, his legal justification is not that. His legal justification is that it's to do with air quality, and he does have a mandate to improve air quality. But you can't, Nigel, say on the one hand that the Jacobs figures you can't accept the Jacobs figures and claim that there's going to be a massive reduction in air quality. They are engineers who say one thing, and you are somebody who says another. I think you have to argue against it and show where they're wrong.
Well, that's where the Imperial College study came in. There are actually two studies, which complicates things rather, and the scientists disagreed with each other, much as the same as they did over COVID. So that is scientists...
But pressure was put on Imperial because they were getting £800,000 from the Mayor.
Well, no. What in fact happened there was that the Deputy Mayor was obviously went for the report that she most liked. So it wasn't a question of putting pressure pressure on. It was there were 2 reports there, and the argument now is a scientific one over the data and the way it was collected.
Nigel, I think that is the most elegant defence of political prestidigitation that I've ever heard. So you win a prize for that. Thank you as always to my panel. Coming up, is the NHS trying to erase women? Plus, undoubtedly a lady, Anne Widdecombe is waiting in the wings, and we'll be asking her, is Britain broken?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, the changeable theme will continue, most of us seeing some further rain at times, but in between there will be some sunshine. So as we end Monday, we've got this ridge of high pressure across the UK. This generally gave us a settled day today, but fronts are waiting up across the northwest, and as we go through the course of the night, we'll see one of these move into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So some showers here. For a lot of England and Wales, though, it should be largely dry, but fairly cloudy. So that will help keep most towns and cities firmly in double figures as we start Tuesday morning. So into Tuesday, we'll track this band of showery rain further southeastwards across England and Wales. Behind it, further showers moving in across parts of western Scotland. Quite blustery here too as we go through the course of the day. Probably the driest conditions down towards the southeast, but even here later on, we will see a few showers. So I think come the afternoon, possibly the best of the sunshine over towards northern England. In the sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm, most of us seeing similar temperatures to what we have seen today. Into Wednesday, I'm hopeful for a little bit more sunshine across the board, but still the risk of some showers, especially across eastern parts of Scotland, down into parts of England too. But in the sunshine, it should feel fairly pleasant, but still that keen wind up across the north. Into Thursday, a band of rain moving across many southern parts of the UK, and really that's going to continue the changeable theme as we go through the course of the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Rachel, my prediction is that £12.50 will be too expensive and the Mayor will not raise the money he expects. I predict a reduction in the cost when it fails to raise enough cash. And Anthony, hi Jacob, if you own a 40-year-old car, ULEZ is free. So ULEZ isn't about clear air. Everybody can buy a 40-year-old car and drive it round for free. I'm not sure about that. I've actually got a couple of 40-year-old cars. The drawback is they don't always go. So you may be free if you can get it to drive, but if it doesn't go, you're a bit stuck. So, the one silver lining of the gloomy cloud of the Farage debanking scandal is to expose the extent to which the phenomenon of ESG, environmental, social and governance, has influenced our institutions, both in the public, particularly the private sector as well. But it hasn't just exposed the problem, it has debunked the very idea of ESG and woke capitalism. Any company that cynically sings the tune of equality, diversity and inclusion can be expected to have very little interest in any of these, as the NatWest issue showed. But in the latest chapter, the infection of woke in our institutions has gone further than you might have expected. It's emerged that 77 NHS trusts have signed up to a scheme called the NHS Rainbow Badge Scheme, in which LGBT charities mark institutions down if they use terms such as mother or woman. In fact, I read the report of the Royal United Hospital in Bath, and I'm pleased to say that the hospital scored 0 points on the gender-neutral language category, and I hope that they will keep this up. But they've spent money ordering a report rather than focusing on caring for patients to beat them up for not allowing mothers to be called mothers. But there are about a third of trusts in the UK have paid for these bizarre schemes to get the rainbow qualification. The question is what's going on in the health service when it's reportedly spending nearly £250,000 on these schemes, when it's got serious problems with the care of patients. Look what happened in Chester Hospital, in which there will have to be a review. So instead of focusing on actually making people better and looking after sick babies, it's wasting money on reports about not calling mothers mothers. Anyway, I'm delighted now to be joined by Humperdinck Jackman of ESG Pro. Thank you so much for coming on. Why are public service institutions spending money on things that seem to me to be so entirely wasteful that the report on the Royal United expects people to be asked when they go in pretty much the first question, not what's wrong with you, but what's your gender? Can this possibly be the right way to be treating patients?
I'm no clinician, but I don't think this is the right approach. I think really it comes down to it's a corruption of what you touched on, environment, social and governance. It's a corruption of what the whole ethos has been about for all of these years. As I see it, this critical social justice approach is a learned political attack where the antagonists have learned from critical race theory, something we've imported lock, stock and barrel from the United States. And they're using social justice and DEI as a vehicle to promote their own very specific agendas, which are not what society overall wants or what individuals want.
And it's very narrowing, isn't it, of freedom of speech? I looked at the report on the Royal United, partly because it's the hospital that serves my constituents. I know it well. It's got an absolutely excellent chief executive who works very hard to improve standards for patients. But this report has a trigger warning on comments made by people at the hospital, one of whom said, please don't waste money on rainbow badges. They're environmentally unfriendly and it's unnecessary virtue signalling. But this requires a trigger warning because it may be so offensive. Well, what price free speech if you can't even say that rainbow badges are a waste of money.
ESG is all about free speech. Freedom of expression.
It doesn't come across like that, does it?
That's how it's been interpreted and been twisted to be interpreted by the proponents of these very loud voices who speak for a minority.
Because if you look at the whole Nigel Farage affair with NatWest, that wasn't free speech at all. They really disliked his free speech and therefore took away his banking facilities. Correct. So explain to me, because you know a great deal about ESG, how did it start out in support of free speech and in support of good governance, and a bit more about how this has been led astray?
ESG covers many, many topics, but let's just digress to look at what's actually happened in the NHS and then go back to the specifics. What it is now, environment under the NHS is net zero. Everything else ignored. Social is about gender identity. Governance, instead of about worrying about better procurement or proper supervision of hospitals and maternity wards and so on, has devolved into board members fearing for their careers. If they don't toe the line, if they don't employ the next more DEI managers and adopt a gender-based political ideology, there are people who are now genuinely afraid of their jobs and their careers.
Because governance should surely be about the ability to whistleblow. If you think something is wrong in an organisation, there should be a method for you to say this, not whether your badge describes your pronouns.
Exactly. Good governance is about having a whistleblowing policy. It goes far beyond that.
Which the NHS seems to be particularly weak on.
It's not very good, is it?
Well, that's what we've seen recently. So how do you get, as a proponent of ESG, it back on the right track, or actually is it a lost cause?
It's by no means a lost cause. In fact, it's something we're helping small businesses especially fight against the corporates who are twisting the evidence in their favour and being a bit clever about covering up specifics. The NHS right now has a problem in imposing very specific social value frameworks on small businesses who are doing the right thing with their ESG reporting. They're being very diligent. But the argument is being distorted by people who are worried about language grading. I mean, the article in The Sun today about not referring to mothers is a language grading which is actually going to disenfranchise the very stakeholders who want to be heard, who want jobs in the NHS, who can bring value.
And that there is this element to which the gender issue discriminates against women going about their ordinary lives and denies them the opportunity to be called mothers, and also forces people to have to identify themselves by gender rather than just going into hospital and being treated and saying, well, look, I've got a pain in my leg or hand or wherever. And this is just a very odd way of dealing with health, isn't it?
Well, exactly. I had an X-ray on my knees last week and there were multiple...
Did they ask you what your gender was?
Absolutely.
They did?
Yes. For no clinical reason, but how will any clinical outcome be improved by a rainbow badge?
Or by you being asked what your gender is? Isn't this actually quite intrusive? Can't people just be left alone to go into hospital and be treated and not have to be quizzed as to something that, in most cases, will be perfectly obvious?
Well, what disturbs me about the twisting of the ESG narrative in this regard is, for several decades now, was the campaign that there should be single-sex wards to protect primarily the dignity of women.
And that's now being reversed, and part of this report is that there should be open toilet facilities for men and women in case people don't want to indicate which they are.
And gender-neutral toilets in schools where schoolgirls are exposed to, potentially, some boy holding a phone over the cubicle.
All of this is paid for by taxpayers, and it costs an absolute fortune when we want that money spent on patients and on pupils.
And they've spent £200,000 of taxpayers' money, and that pales into insignificance compared to the costs, the salaries of employing all of these DEI managers.
You're going to have to come back and talk about that next time. So thank you very much, Humperdinck. Coming up, is Britain broken? Former Shadow Home Secretary Anne Widdecombe may have the answer.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Today, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has declared police should be tackling every crime. This may sound quite self-evident that police should be doing the one job we rely on them for, but no crime should be too trivial for the police force. While the Home Secretary suggests that crime rates have fallen dramatically since 2010, post-pandemic we're seeing rising rates of crimes across the UK, with only 5.7% of crimes being solved. This year, it was reported in the last 3 years, police failed to solve a single burglary in over half of neighbourhoods in the United Kingdom. And we can't complain there aren't enough bobbies on the beat, because they're an all-time high. Except they may not be on the beat, they may be behind desks. Trust in the police has been damaged by a series of recent policing scandals, the murder of Sarah Everard and recent surge in police officers jailed for gross misconduct has been part of the problem. Is it a question of quality over quantity? Well, I'm now joined by the former Shadow Home Secretary, Anne Widdecombe, to discuss this. Anne, Isn't it obvious that the police should investigate crime?
Well, there was a time when we took it absolutely for granted that if you reported a crime to the police, they followed that through. And they might or they might not solve it, but they followed it through. They didn't say, oh, well, too bad, it's too low on our list of priorities. So, yes, I mean, it should be self-evident that if the police receive a report of a crime, that they do actually investigate that crime. But we've reached a stage now, and it didn't come overnight. It's been going on for quite a long while, where the police call it prioritising, but what it actually is ignoring. That is the problem.
Yes, and therefore not getting the whole picture of the crime that is going on in a local community because they're simply not going out to it. But is this because of a lack of police? Should we have even more than we've got? Is it because of bureaucracy? Is it because of changing working practices?
Yes, we need more police. That I have no doubt about at all. We do need more police, and also we need them to be actually active as opposed to dealing with bureaucracy. Now, one of the reasons, for example, that they're so loath to deal with small amounts of cannabis possession is the completely disproportionate amount of bureaucracy that goes with taking that person to the police station, processing them through custody. It is a long job, let alone if you then decide to go on to court. So one of the things that we have to do, and I said this when I was Shadow Home Secretary, so this problem's been around a long time. One of the things that we have to do is to speed up those processes and to make it possible for the police to deliver a miscreant to the police station, tell the desk sergeant what the problem is, and go back on the streets.
And go back onto the streets, but also to get the cases through the magistrates' court quickly, where there is an enormous backlog. We've closed magistrates' courts, that justice takes weeks, if not months, to take place. And it simply becomes not worth it for very low-level crime.
And there is no sense of urgency to get on top of that. There's no sense of urgency to clear the backlog. There's no sense which says, let's have special court sitting at the weekend, and just do that until the backlog is done. It's a bit like NHS backlogs. If you suddenly decide to have a real blitz on cataracts and you take over local hotels and you start working the operating theatres at night, you clear your cataract lists.
I actually happen to know a brilliant doctor who I ought to invite on this programme who specialises in going to hospitals that have problems with their cataract backlog and sorting it out for them, and he can do it.
Can be done.
And it's just a question of organisation. So where do we get this organisation? Is it a problem with the chief constables? What's going on in Manchester? Because we read a lot about how Manchester is beginning to crack this problem.
We do, but what it takes is willpower. And that's what it takes. Now, I don't see willpower on the part of the Home Secretary. I don't see willpower on the part of the individual Home Office ministers. I certainly don't see willpower on the part of the civil servants. And it takes that will and that pressure from the top. I always used to say when I was Minister, management by objective. This is the objective. That's what we want to reach, not management by statistics, by objective.
And the Home Office is a heavily criticised department. But did it in fact make sense to have the courts with the Home Office? Because actually the whole process needs to be unified from arrest through to sentence. You need a system that can cope with the number of arrests that you're having. And we now get a situation where criminal justice acts come through, increasing sentences, but the responsibility of the sentences then falls on the Justice Department, which doesn't have the resources to find the prison places, and that we've got very uncoordinated government in this area.
I took the line, and in my day, prison places were, the absolute business of the Home Office, and I took the line when we ran out of places, as we did. You make extra places. So I brought in porter cabins from Norwegian oil rigs. I brought in a prison ship, which Labour derided as the Hulks and then kept for 9 years. I was looking at taking over a disused holiday camp, not to make a holiday camp out of it, but you had all the accommodation there.
Yes,
all you needed was a secure perimeter. There are ways that you can deal with it, but it takes will. And how much easier is it just not to send people to prison at all?
Well, it's easier just not to prosecute, and we've completely given up on drugs crime, haven't we?
We have, a long time ago.
A long time ago, and therefore we have laws in place that are routinely ignored. And it seems to me this is very bad societally, that if you get into the habit of ignoring the law, then it gradually creeps up to more and more serious crimes. If cannabis is de facto legal, what about the next?
That was exactly what Giuliani discerned. And he said, right, if we focus on low-level crime, the bigger crime will take care of itself. And indeed, there was one famous occasion when his force went out and en masse, they had a big blitz on ticket evasion in the subways. And they caught a couple of people wanted for murder, because, of course, if you've murdered somebody, you don't much care about your ticket at the subway, do you? So it was that sort of approach which said, nothing's too small, and if we focus on some of the small stuff, that sends a message through.
And deterrence is all about not the seriousness of the sentence, but the fear that you will get caught. That's what stops people committing crime.
That is the problem with knife crime, because if somebody thought if they went out with a knife in their pocket or their handbag and they were caught having that knife, if they thought they were going to there and then be taken to the police station, be held in custody, find themselves in court a couple of days later, they wouldn't do it. The reason they do it is they don't expect to be caught.
And we don't see enough police on the streets. So though we've got the numbers of police, I mean, I'm very lucky because I live in Westminster and you see a lot of police who are fantastic, particularly the ones around Parliament. But actually, in a lot of London, you hardly ever see the police.
I can vividly remember not that long ago walking from Leicester Square through Trafalgar Square all the way down to the House of Commons. Didn't see a single soul until I got to the House of Commons. Policeman, I mean.
Thank you very much, Anne. That's all from me. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wootton. Dan, what's coming up on your
Jacob,
programme?
it is wonderful to have you back. We have missed you, but it was nice being able to visualise you in your Somerset pad after you broadcast from there. It was interesting, Jacob, hearing you talk with Nigel earlier about Nadine Dorries, because I have to admit, I thought her letter was needed. I know it was tough for your party, but I think it was needed. So we're going to be having that debate tonight with Dame Andrea Jenkins, Belinda de Lucy and Benjamin Butterworth.
Oh, well, that sounds extremely exciting. I mean, Nadine is such a wonderful character. I think she's a real loss to politics. I'm sorry that she's decided to stand down. I think she contributed. She's sparky, she's fun, she makes politics interesting. But that's enough of peons of praise for the great Nadine Dorries. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been Said Nation. It'll be sunny in Somerset. It was all summer.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, the changeable theme will continue. Most of us seeing some further rain at times, but in between there will be some sunshine. So as we end Monday, we've got this ridge of high pressure across the UK. This generally gave us a settled day today, but fronts are waiting up across the northwest, and as we go through the course of the night, we'll see one of these move into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So some showers here. For a lot of England and Wales, though, it should be largely dry, but fairly cloudy. So that will help keep most towns and cities firmly in double figures as we start Tuesday morning. So into Tuesday, we'll track this band of showery rain further southeastwards across England and Wales. Behind it, further showers moving in across parts of western Scotland. Quite blustery here too as we go through the course of the day. Probably the driest conditions down towards the southeast, but even here later on, we will see a few showers. So I think come the afternoon, possibly the best of the sunshine over towards northern England. In the sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm, most of us seeing similar temperatures to what we have seen today. Into Wednesday, I'm hopeful for a little bit more sunshine across the board, but still the risk of some showers, especially across eastern parts of Scotland, down into parts of England too. But in the sunshine, it should feel fairly pleasant, but still that keen wind up across the north. Into Thursday, a band of rain moving across many southern parts of the UK, and really that's going to continue the changeable theme as we go through the course of the week.
That warm feeling inside.